This Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. We have just finished an interview with Mrs. I.T. Strickland, and we're going to do an interview with Mr. Ray Smith. Is that correct?
Yes.
R. Ray Smith. What does R stand for?
Raymond R. Smith.
Oh, Raymond R. Smith. Does the R have a name, or is it just
Raymond Robert Smith.
Raymond Robert?
Yes.
Who are your parents?
My father's name was William H. Smith. My mother was Margaret McDonald, was her maiden name.
Where were they born?
My father was born in Delaware. My mother was born in Guelph, Ontario, Canada.
What brought them here?
Well, my mother's family moved to Kansas in about 1870, during the 1870s. And when they came through St. Joe, Missouri, on their way to Kansas, my mother was taken by a family by the name of Sloop in St. Joe, and she lived with them until her marriage to my father in 1889, I think.
Now the Sloop was a ranch.
Sloop and Ballinger was the two men who formed the cattle company here. Their headquarters was at Short Springs, about 9 miles east of Alva. The Sloop family run the headquarters camp at the Short Springs headquarters. My mother worked for them, and she did lots of cooking and all of the household work, or helped with the household work. I don't know whether she did all of it or not. But she lived with the Sloop family for many years. And my father was born in Delaware, and he moved with his family to Kansas about 1878. And he worked in the Cherokee Strip for the Sloop and Ballinger Company for several years before the strip was opened. And there he met my mother. And they were married about 1889. Lived in Kansas after they were married. And then when the strip was opened in 1893, my father made the run and staked a claim just on the east side of Alva. It's the same place that I live on now.
Well, you hear a lot about the Cherokee Strip Livestock Association. Was Sloop a part of that? Do you know?
Yes, the Sloop and Ballinger Ranch was a part of the Cherokee, a part of the Eagle Chief Pool. This is a number of cattle companies that formed an association, and Sloop and Ballinger was one of them. About the Cherokee Pool, I can't remember very much about that, but I think you could get the records straight. I think it's recorded in other places.
My understanding is that they were very strong politically, that they had a strong lobby in Washington, the Cherokee Strip Livestock Association.
I think they did.
And of course that they opposed settlement because they had, cattle land.
Sloop was a colonel in the Northern Army during the Civil War, and he and Ballinger formed this association and came down here after the war and had this cattle ranch.
Did you know Sloop and Ballinger?
Well, I knew Sloop. I've seen him, but I don't remember ever seeing Mr. Ballinger.
What can you tell about Mr. Sloop?
Well, Mr. Sloop was a German. He was a German military man, and he spoke very broken language, very broken English. And one story I remember about him was told by an old man here, an old cowboy. Mr. Sloop got lost one time, and he tried to flag down some other fellows, and he was pretty well tanked up with liquor. He drank a good deal of liquor. And he said, when he got up to them, he said, "I winked and I winked and I winked, and you didn't come." Mr. Sloop lived in St. Joe with his family for many years, and after the strip was opened, my mother came and lived with us for a while in our home near Alva.
You were about 3 years old when you
I was
came down
about
here.
3, yes.
What's the first you remember of this area?
Well, the first thing that I remember about coming down here was on the way down, my father and my father and his brother, my uncle, were each driving a wagon. And I decided I would like to go and ride with my uncle a while. And I rode for a mile or two, and then I became very nervous, and I wanted to get back in the wagon with my parents. So he let me get back. I remember that. Now, that's about the first thing I ever remember in my whole life, I believe.
What's it like riding a wagon? One of the old...
Oh, well, it would be very comfortable in those days. If you had a nice spring seat, it was all right. But for a person used to riding in an automobile, it would be pretty rough.
Is this a covered wagon you came in?
Yes.
Does it get hot inside those?
Oh, it gets pretty warm. Yes. When the south wind blows, you'd sweat some and cool off.
How much mileage could you cover in a day?
Well, I never did make any trips in a covered wagon. However, my wife's folks came down here from Nebraska about in 1894. They came part way part of them came in a covered wagon, 2 or 3 covered wagons. They could make 20, 25 miles a day, I think, is about what they made. My wife and her mother and some of the children came on a train, and her husband, my wife's mother's husband, came with some more of the company in wagons. They came down to near Enid and bought a relinquishment there. They didn't come in the run, but they came about a year later. They've been here practically as long as I have.
I understand this Cherokee Strip run, of course, things were getting pretty wild by then. In fact, after that, when they said no more runs.
Yes.
But I understand that in the Cherokee Strip run, that only a small percentage of those who made the run actually were able to claim land. Is that right?
Well, I don't know. I never have read any statistics on that, and I don't remember at the time.
So many made that run.
Yes, sir. My father came into the Strip from near Hartner, south of Hartner, Kansas. And he rode a horse down that day and staked a claim. A lot of people came in wagons and buggies, and some came on the train. The Santa Fe Railroad ran they were supposed to run not any faster than a horse could go. The train was, but I don't know whether that worked out or not.
Had to slow it down.
I don't know whether a train would run very much faster than a horse would run those days anyway.
How far is your farm from Alva?
Well, it's a mile east of the college, on the east side of Highway 281.
You still live there?
Yes.
And you haven't broken it up or anything? It's still the full farm?
It's still a full quarter. Are
you farming it now?
Yes. I planted the wheat this last fall.
Did you work for the did you work on the Sloop Boundary Range?
No, I never did work there. That is long before my time.
Your dad?
My dad worked there, yes.
What are some of the experiences that he told you about dealing with the range at that time?
Well, I don't remember very many. He spoke about having side camps. They would have, out a few miles from their headquarters, they would have a camp so that they wouldn't have to ride clear back to the head camp all the time. They had one camp here on the town side of Alva, I believe, and put up hay in the summertime for their cattle in the winter, right here on the town side of Alva.
Was he working here then?
He was working here then, yes. He worked for the Sloop and Ballinger.
Did he determine when he was here, I guess, where he decided he wanted
Well, yes, he was in here, you see, several years before the strip was opened. And he and two of his brothers and another man, I think, got a surveyor to show them where the location of various quarters of land, and also to point out those quarters that were designated as school land, so that they wouldn't file on the school land, and then their filing would be canceled.
Did he know that a town would be settled here?
Yes, he knew he would be close to Alva. He was about 1.5 miles from the depot, and he knew the whole arrangement. He knew all the lay of the land and everything.
So that made it pretty good land to be able to get that close to a town.
Yes, he was pretty familiar. He and his brother were pretty familiar with the country. They'd all been down here and worked.
If I'd been in Oklahoma City, you might have about 6 or 10 high-rise buildings there.
Well, Alva didn't happen to grow like Oklahoma City.
Where did you go to school?
I went to school in Alva, to Washington School.
How large was the school?
How large?
How many students?
Oh, I don't remember anymore very well, but probably 30 children in the class, 30 or 40 maybe. I remember some of the early first grades were 30 or 40 children.
Let's see, well, of course, you started the school in the late 1800s, probably about 18.
Well, I was about 8 years old when I started school. It was about 1899. Yes.
What do you remember about school, particularly thinking of the public schools?
Well, I don't remember any particularly.
Any memorable teachers or any memorable?
Well, I remember of the early teachers, Miss Adams was the first teacher I remember, and Miss Greenlee was another teacher, and Mab, can't remember her last name. And the 8th grade teacher was Miss Ernest. I remember her very distinctly, and I had a great respect for her. And I graduated about the same time that Mr. A.G. Vinson was superintendent of schools, and he resigned, and then Mr. Guy Lisk was the superintendent of schools when I graduated in the 8th grade, about 1906.
Who were some of the leaders in the Alva community when you were growing up?
Oh, I can't hardly remember anymore. Mr. Cofield was a prominent man, and Mr. Snoddy was, I don't remember whether Mr. Snoddy was at that time, later he became more or less prominent. Mr. Pat Oates was a prominent sheriff in the early days, and well,
did you
some of the prominent saloon keepers were Mr. Spaulding and others whose names I can't recall right now.
Give yourself away on all the saloon keepers.
Maybe I did.
I'm going to turn this over because we're reaching fairly near the end of this side, and we'll start again on the other side. This is a continuation of an interview with Mr. Ray Smith. We're talking about people in Alva in the earlier days. Now, the college was founded here about 1900, wasn't it?
1898, I think it was.
1898. Did you ever attend the college?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
I remember I was present on the day that the cornerstone was laid as a college. That was quite a while ago.
Tell about that.
Well, I remember they had a parade that marched from the square to the college and had many floats, and lots of school children especially were prominent, because I guess I remember them because I was among the school kids more than other people. But there was quite a crowd that day, quite an occasion.
You were then attending public school.
I was in the public school, yes.
What was the college called at that time?
Northwestern State Teachers College.
In the very earliest days, the college was in a church building, wasn't it?
Yes, it was in what is now the Friends Church. It was first established. And the old building called the Castle on the Hill was built about, I don't remember, about 1900, I think. Of course, you'd have to look up the exact date. I can't remember it.
Friends Church makes me think Quaker. Is that correct? Is it a Quaker church?
Yes, in the beginning it was the Congregational Church. And then later the Quaker or Friends Church bought the building and still use it as a church.
Are there many Quakers here? It's not too large a city, and is there a Quaker community here?
Well, no, there isn't a regular Quaker community. They have a good many members here. I don't know just what the congregation is.
I had wondered, if a group of Quakers might have come here.
Well, no, there was no group of Quakers that I remember. They just a few assembled and started a church.
Well, using that building as a church when the school was there, Miss Strickland thought that they were.
Yes.
It was being used as a church then as well as now then.
Yes, it was.
School during the week and the church during the Sunday.
I think.
When did you go to the college?
Well, I started at college in 1906, the fall of 1906.
And when did you finish?
I finished in 1913.
What did you study?
Well, I just took a regular college course, I guess. It was at that time a teacher's college, and it's supposed to get a life certificate, they called it, to teach.
What were some of the? Now, when you went to the college, they were in their new building, or they had moved away from the Friends Church.
Yes.
What were some of the activities of the college at the time you attended? Student activities.
Well, the student activities were the literary societies were the Occident Society and the Orient Society, the East and the West. Nearly everybody was assigned at that time to one or the other of these societies. All the students were. And then they put on plays and debates. Had a generally social time.
Was the social life around these societies too?
Yes, it was quite a bit. All of the social activities centered around those two societies.
Probably the social events.
Oh, I don't remember very much. When I was going to school, they had parties. The girls had societies or sororities. There were no fraternities, though, when I went to school, but there were some sororities.
There were Greek letter sororities?
Yes.
Were they national Greek letter sororities?
Well, I believe there's 2 or 3 of them were.
I wonder why they had the sororities and not the fraternities, do you know? Was there any particular reason?
Never did think about that. I don't know why.
I wondered if that was a school policy, or if maybe the sororities were better promoters in getting them in.
Well, that's probably true.
How many students would you say were in the college when you attended?
Oh, there was about 300 probably 350 sometimes. It varied from about 300 to a few more.
What athletic activities did you have?
Well, I had baseball and football and basketball, tennis. They had about all the, and track meets too. Track meets were pretty popular then because it didn't take very much equipment to get in a track event. And there was a pretty good football team. Baseball was not so, well, they played baseball, but they never had as good a baseball team as they did football team, as I remember.
Who did you compete against in the early days?
Well, they competed against the other normal schools at Weatherford and at Edmond and at Durant, these other college schools. And they also competed with some of the schools of Kansas. If you could find somebody who is a good athlete, come in.
Come on in. Oh, okay. I'm gonna turn that over. I'll be right back. At some of the schools, smaller schools, actually played and beat such teams as Oklahoma A&M and University of Oklahoma in the early days. I know that Kingfisher College, which doesn't even exist at one time, beat OU in football. Did you ever? Of course, they weren't major. I mean, they were larger schools, but they weren't sports powers then. Did you all ever play OU or Oklahoma A&M in any sport?
Well, I was never much of an athlete, and I really don't remember about that. If you'd ask somebody that's a good athlete.
What kind of crowds did they have for the games? Did they have a stadium?
Well, they had pretty good crowds usually. People liked to watch athletic contests.
When you got out of college, what did you do then?
Well, I graduated in 1913, and then I farmed. I went to school at Kansas University a couple of years and studied chemistry.
Oh.
And then the First World War came along, and I was in the Army a while. Then I came back home and farmed. I've been a farmer all my life.
What in World War I? What were you in?
Well, I was at Fort Riley in a
cavalry.
No, it was in a medical company. But I never went overseas. I was in that company there for a while, and then they transferred me to a part they called chemical warfare section. I was in that. I was in the Army altogether about 6 months when the war ended.
And what did you do after that?
After that, right after that, I taught school about 6 months at Enid, at Guthrie, in the Oklahoma Methodist University.
Well, at Guthrie?
Yes. It later became the Oklahoma City College, I guess.
Yes, I think at Epworth University.
Yeah.
What was that school like at that time?
Oh, it was a small school. It was an interesting school. There was lots of interesting people there. And Mr. McRill, do you know him?
Is that Leslie McRill?
Yes, Leslie McRill. He was one of the teachers there.
Is that right?
Yes.
The one who's the poet?
Yes.
Well.
He was up here about a year or two ago, but I didn't see him. I didn't know he was here.
We have an interview with him. We have a tape.
Oh, do you? Well,
yes.
Tell him hello for me.
All right. Sure will.
I'll be glad to hear from him.
He's quite a poet.
Yes. Yeah.
I believe was Albert McCrail, who was the city manager of Oklahoma City years ago. Is he a brother of Leslie, or do you know?
No, I don't know.
Are they from Alva? Where is he up here?
Well, I don't know where he came. I don't know where he was born or anything about him. All I know was that I met him there, and he was a pleasant fellow, guys. I used to have a lot of fun with him.
Yes. Well, he's still a very nice person. In the early days of Alva, thinking before you graduated from school and such, What would you say was the most memorable occasion you can think of, a highlight occasion? It's maybe a big order to ask, what's the biggest thing that happened, but...
Some of the important, or some of the things that I thought were important, was the building of the courthouse. I was interested in watching them build that, and I can't remember of any. The saloons were one of the things that I remember very vividly. I was never much interested in saloons, except that they seemed to be very thick around the square. When the state was made when the territory was made a state, the saloons were all outlawed then, and it was a good thing, I guess. And that seemed to be a pretty hot question, whether they ought to be saloons or not. My family was against saloons quite a bit, and the people that you met in the town, my dad was more or less a liberal fellow. He didn't care whether the saloons were there or whether they were not. And one of the things about the admission of this territory as a state is that these saloons were abolished, and that made quite an impression on me.
Now this was part of the Enabling Act.
Yes.
It had to, if I'm correct, if Prohibition had not passed, the state would not have become Oklahoma would not become a state. Isn't that correct?
Well, I don't know. You're probably right, because I don't remember the law.
I believe that was a provision that was made because of Indian Territory.
Well, I expect that's right.
Now, I understand, of course, Oklahoma Territory was wet and Indian Territory was dry at the time of the state, and then all of a sudden it was both dry. I understood from an interview with a doctor in Enid, a retired doctor in Enid, who was made a trip to the inauguration around statehood when he was a high school student, that on his trip back, hitting the border area between Oklahoma and Indian Territory, that they were having tremendous sales, closing out sales. Did they have closing out? But all these saloons they had up here, they have a closing out sale?
Well, I don't remember of any such sale. Seems to me like they just shut them up and had to cart their whiskey away. I don't remember of any sale.
Uh-huh. During statehood, now you were, you would have been 16 about the time of the vote on statehood, not old enough to vote. But do you remember any of the debate or any of the controversies that went along with the statehood argument?
Yes, there was one that I remember in particular, because the question was whether the whiskey interests, by paying taxes, would support the schools. And I remember one argument was that if the schools don't get this whiskey money, they won't have enough money to run on. But that was a false argument. And the schools, the saloons were put out of business, but the schools still kept on going. That was one of the arguments. And I guess another one was that everybody had been used to doing what he pleased and wanted to keep on doing what he wanted to do.
Of course, there was a lot of controversy on statehood.
Yes.
Those who favored and opposed, and most people were very strong in whichever opinion they had.
Well, that's the funny thing now. One of the main things that I remember was that all of the controversy is centered on the on the saloons. I don't remember of any other argument for or against statehood.
Jim Crow was an argument. Of course,
Yes,
it probably didn't involve
that didn't
Albert,
come. That had a little effect here because there were no Negroes.
but have more effect in the central Oklahoma.
Yes.
What was your family's feeling about statehood at that time, about the Constitution?
Oh, I think they were all in favor of it.
Of course, thinking in terms of the 20s, can you think of any highlights of that period of time, 1920s?
Well, during that time I farmed all the time. In 1919, the war was over and I commenced to farm. The only
What was your family's feeling about statehood at that time, about the Constitution?
Oh, I think they were all in favor of it.
Of course, thinking in terms of the 20s, can you think of any highlights of that period of time, 1920s?
Well, during that time I farmed all the time. In 1919, the war was over and I commenced to farm. The only thing about 1920 was that the wheat was pretty high priced part of the time and part of the time it was pretty cheap. And I was married in 1921. And I can't remember of any particular thing that I would mention.
What were you, you've been growing wheat lately. Have you been growing wheat all the time, or was there another earlier crop there?
Mostly always wheat. During the Depression in 1930, I did run a dairy for a couple of 3 years.
In the same place?
Yes.
Why did you drop it?
Well, it just got to be so much work and I had other interests and could make a living other ways, so I quit.
Let's talk about the Depression days. I know that things got pretty rough everywhere during the Depression. Why don't you reminisce a little bit about the Depression and some of the things that happened during this period?
Oh, I can't hardly remember any of those things being very spectacular, except that everything was exceedingly cheap, including what you had to sell and what you had to buy. But it seemed like there was no especially surprising thing. I can't remember anything that was especially important or upsetting or anything like that. We just lived along in those days and got by the best we could.
Miss Strickland, in our interview with her, had quite a bit to say about the killing of animals during this period. Did this happen in your dairy farm? Did you have
No, I didn't shoot any of my cattle, kill any of them. And I don't remember, I don't believe I had any. I don't believe I was milking cows at that time. I don't believe I had enough cattle to kill.
You couldn't kill them if you didn't have good.
No.
What about the Dust Bowl? Did it affect you?
Well, the dust years were pretty bad. I remember one time especially, it just got as black as as night in the middle of the daytime. Most of the time you could see a quarter of a mile or half a mile, but one especially bad stormy day you couldn't see more than 10 or 15 feet.
That was a discouraging period.
Yes. But I don't know, for some reason or other, I don't remember that I was ever much discouraged. I don't know why. I just took it like it came, and I just kept on. I don't know why, but I don't remember being completely discouraged and ready to quit. I never was that way. I don't know why.
How many acres do you farm there?
Well, there's 150 acres in this place at that time.
You're farming most of it?
Yes.
Why don't you talk a little bit about farming methods? Of course, prior to World War II, there's tremendous difference, I know, than now when you had to deal purely with animals, you know, and even earlier before you had some of the machinery which pulled by animals would do so much more than they used to. Why don't you talk about farming in the very earliest days? How much you would be able to farm then, compared with what you'd be able to farm now in the same amount of time?
Well, farming with horses is the only farming that I ever did for a good many years. I suppose about 200 or 250 acres would be as much as one man could fairly easily farm then. Of course, some people had more acres than that, but about 200 acres or 250. About the only kind of farming I did was with horses until about 1920, 25. Then I got a tractor. But with horses and headers and binders and that kind of machinery, about 25, 30 acres would be as much as wheat as you could cut in a day. And plowing, of course, was 5 or 6 acres, I guess, would be as much. A good many times the farmers listed their land with a lister, and instead of plowing it, and you could get over more acres that way.
How do you describe the lister?
A lister is a machine that just makes a row, plants a row of corn. Just makes a row, shallow, 4 or 5 inches deep, and a row and a ridge. And while the plowing, it just turns all the land over level.
Have you participated in any activities in Alva or in this area that might be of particular interest in any organizations or other activities?
Well, I was a member of the school board for several years, of the public school system. And I was superintendent of the Presbyterian Sunday School for a few years. And outside of that, there was no other organization I was a member of.
What were some of the problems of being a school board member during this period?
Well,
school board members have their problems today and different ones.
I guess the main problem then was money, like it is now. I remember one year during the Depression, we had about $42,000 to spend on the school system of Alva. While at the present time, the budget of the school is more than $1 million. You can see that there was a good deal of skimping that had to be done in those times. The teachers, I guess they were all pretty loyal people. They didn't complain much, even if they had 30 or 40 children in the school. And the superintendent of the schools didn't get very big wages, but he got by all right, I guess. The other teachers, I suppose they got $80 or $90, which wouldn't be very much now. $80 or $90 a month. The school system although it spends much more now, the number of students or the number of children in the district is practically the same as it was 50 years ago.
What were some of the ways that you were able to cut costs in operating schools?
Oh, probably the main thing is cut the teachers' wages. I don't know if I don't remember that they cut them any much. I don't remember that we cut them any, but they were not very high in the beginning. And they had to just do less athletic work and have less subjects taught, have less general activities.
Can you recall, besides money, any other problems or any other challenges that you faced in the school area? What period was this incident?
Well, when I was member of the school board, it was during the 1930s, and the main problem then was to get money to run the school. There was no racial problem or no social problem of any kind at all. Everybody got along all right. The teachers, there was no colored teachers or no colored pupils, or no conflict of interest like that at all.
Y'all have been real quiet back there. Have y'all thought of any good questions that we ought to ask?
I'd like to ask Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was a local weather observer for years. Also, I'd like for him to comment on oil well drilling was right across the road from the west.
All right. You were a weather observer for a while?
Yes, I'm the weather observer now.
Oh, you are? Well, let's talk about the weather. You gave us nice weather coming up here. How did you get involved as a weather observer?
Well, the weather observer who had been doing the work here quit, and some way or other they got a hold of my name and came out and to see me if I wanted to be the observer, and so I took the job. It isn't very strenuous work to observe, to look at the temperature and read the temperatures every day and take the amount of rainfall is about the extent of it. So I have been an observer for about 18 or 19 years, I believe now.
Who do you report it to?
I report to the Tulsa Weather District Office and also to the Weather Bureau at Oklahoma City. Every week I send them the report of the temperatures and rainfall. And the monthly report I send to Tulsa.
You predict what the weather's going to be tomorrow?
No, I'm not able to do that.
You only observe what it was, not what you think it's going to be.
That's about the extent of my weather observing. The weather seems to be a little drier now, it seems to me, than it was 15 years ago. I don't know why, but it seems like the rainfall has dropped off 2 or 3 inches per year.
Why don't we talk about the oil that was drilled? Was it drilled on your farm or?
No, it was right across the road. The drilling was right across the road from my farm. But they, at that time, it was purely wildcat speculation, and a man by the name of Harry Noy, who had the farm right on the west side of my place, was one of the principal promoters. And they drilled a well there about 1908. Turned out to be a dry hole.
Did you ever drill anymore?
They never have drilled anymore around there.
How much have they drilled up in this area? Alva area?
Well, not very much right close to Alva. I guess about the closest to Alva is about 2 miles south on the on the section down there where the airport is. I think they drilled a well on the southwest quarter of that section. And the one east of me, they drilled a well about 2 miles east of Alva and a half a mile south. But they were all dry holes so far.
Do you think of any other questions? Are there any of the highlights or interesting events that took place? So what do you think was the most exciting event for Alva? The biggest thing that happened to Alva as long as you were here?
Oh, I think the college is the biggest thing.
How many students do you have now?
I think there are about, how many? 2,000? A little over 2,000. 2,300 maybe.
2,300 students. It's quite a growth from when you were there, isn't it?
Yes, quite a bit. But I think that's the most important thing that ever came to Alva. And this other vocational school out here now, it'll probably develop into quite a school.
Yes.
I'd like to ask another thing. I'd like to ask Mr. Smith to remember the balloon ascension that was demonstrated in the courthouse lawn with a boy, and I seem to remember a man getting killed.
Yes, I remember that time.
What is this? We probably can't take you out. What is
The occasion was a balloon ascension in the square at Alva. The crowd had assembled around this balloon. They had a fire below it, you see, to heat the air. And all of a sudden the old balloon split. They had erected poles on each side of the balloon to steady it when it was inflated. And when this balloon split, these poles fell, and one man was killed by a falling pole. Isn't that right? Wasn't that the way it was?
The 4x4 fell on him.
I think that, yes.
4x4 fell on the man. He didn't fall in the fire.
No. The falling timber killed him.
Where was the balloon? What was the balloon ascension promoted for?
Oh, just kind of a 4th of July celebration, I think.
He was a barnstormer?
Yes.
Not a local?
No. The balloonist wasn't. The man who was killed was a local man.
Oh, it fell upon a local man who happened to be there.
You see, there was a large crowd all around the balloon. They needed some assistance to hold this balloon down. And those people were holding it down. And that's how this man happened to get killed.
Was there any other barnstorming that took place? The
airplanes came here about 1910 when they had a Wright airplane, or a copy of a plane made like the Wright brothers' first planes were. A man took off from the college campus here, from the northwest part of the college campus, and flew around town, came back and landed. He bounced to about 20 feet high. When he came down, I was standing about a block away from him. This was the first airplane that I had ever seen, and this was just a kind of a spectacular thing that the businessmen brought here to bring trade to town, and they got a large crowd of people here that day.
Think of anything else? These are good questions. How about you? You don't think of a thing? You think of anything that I haven't asked that we ought to ask? Yes.
On Saturdays, at the street corner north of the courthouse, there would be sales there. The auctioneer, the big auctioneer, 240 pounds of pulp, he labeled himself, would sell the things people had brought in. He was sort of a pre-runner to the community sales. I haven't thought about that.
Well, that was Bob Kirkbride was the auctioneer. He was a large man, but he was a pretty good auctioneer. He sold everything from cattle and churns and butter and whatever you had to sell, he would sell it. And it was quite an attraction to draw people to town. Everybody who had anything to sell, they came and sold it there. All the way from livestock to clothing and everything else you had.
Reminiscent of shop meets of today.
Yes. Mr. Kirkbride was quite an auctioneer. He was well known all over the county.
Think of any others? He's real good.
Along with promotional events, I can recall an automobile, Willis Knight, I believe it was, that had spring suspension on it. It was supposed to be for super. And it was something like a daredevil act where they jumped across the gas, run up a ramp and jumped across the gas down another ramp. And it was held at the corner of the Central National Bank.
Can
You nearly missed the ramp and nearly slide down a bunch of people that barely missed the crowd.
you remember that?
No, I don't remember that occasion. I guess I was not present that day.
Oh, can we think of any others? How about rodeos? Do you have rodeos up here?
Yes, they had rodeos here. I never did attend very much, but they have had pretty big rodeos here in the past. They're not so well attended. They're not so many anymore. The main performers, I think, go to Oklahoma City and other places where they can get a bigger crowd.
Well, can we think of any more questions? These are real good. This has been an interview with Mr. Ray Smith in Alva, Oklahoma, October 24th, 1972. Certainly appreciate it a lot.